this week we had to read Curbing Corporate Social Responsibility and watch Doing Good in an Uncertain World. I personally liked the video a lot more than I did the reading, just because the reading was really focused on Australian beliefs and how Australians are using CSR. It did kind of go in an overview, but it really hit on Australian beliefs and regulations and things like that, so I didn't really connect with it like I would have if it was more focused on the United States, but I did get a lot of takeaways from it. Just a basic overview, it explains what CSR is, which is corporate social responsibility, and that basically they define it as a social license, which in the end we will prove to have implications. And then let me just do a quick run through. First, they talk about business isn't just business, so it's showing two sides of the story, how some people say that businesses should stick to their knitting and not go beyond that, and then some people think that they need to get socially engaged and really jump into that social aspect of things because it's an evolving world, so you have to evolve with it. So that's just explaining how some people think business isn't just business. And then it goes on to explain the local debate and how some people are finding it beneficial to use CSR and not beneficial, and how Australians are trying to make it mandatory to use CSR and kind of implementing it already into the writings and the language and certain regulations in specific companies. So just kind of keying in on that, and then how getting involved in the culture war is part of the CSR, because once you jump into the social responsibility, you're really getting into that culture aspect of things and you're really jumping into it, and how that can implicate a company, and basically it could potentially ruin its reputation or its integrity. And then how CSR is causing politicization and not pluralism, and basically how getting into CSR is going to get you more involved into politics, which may not be in the best interest of a company, because you're going to be involved with, like I said, politics, which will in the end implicate your board of directors or the company's board of directors. And then how pluralism is just overall better for a community. And then the rise of CSR, why it rose after World War II, things like that. The Australian rise in the 1990s and 2000. Again, politics and why it has a big key in there. Social responsibility and how Australians changed the wording and how it's perceived to make it legal. And then really the implications that are caused, and in the end what a great solution would be. So one side of the paper I don't agree with, and the other side I do agree with. I do believe we need to curb corporate social responsibility, because it does pose too many implications on corporate leaders and the integrity of a company, and overall just the social aspect of things, because as it is explained in the passage or the article, that by getting involved with social aspects of things, you might be focusing on what they call the left wing and not the right wing, or vice versa. So by getting involved in that social aspect, you may think you're doing one thing for one customer, but in the end, if you conform and change to one customer, you're potentially hurting another one. So at the end of the day, it's better to just kind of stick to your guns and keep upholding your business integrity, instead of trying to change and conform to what's around you. So I have to agree with, in the end, they use, I'm going to use a little insert that they use, by promoting respect for the perspectives of all members of the community. The community pluralism principle would not only protect the fundamental rights and traditional freedoms of speech, conscious thought, and association of all groups, it would also ensure that Australian corporations respect the only kind of diversity that ultimately matters in a liberal democracy, the diversity of political opinion that is the foundation of a free society. And I really think that keys into what should be the important part of a company, not getting into that politics side of things, because when you use CSR and you're trying to implement it and make it mandatory, then or if Australians do that, then you're basically uprooting that politics opinion that the people have. Because if you're working in for example, if I was working in a company and I have my specific beliefs, but then they uproot that because of the CSR mandatory rules and regulations, and including those diverse words, including that diverse language, and not being able to use certain verbiage that I was accustomed to using, then that could ultimately change my political view or silence my beliefs. So, or even if they did vice versa and they did something I thought was right, but it hurt someone else. So if you do that in a corporate aspect of things, you're really hindering the overall free society. So I don't think that incorporating CSR into every company would be in the best interest of the society as a whole, because it potentially is taking away their free speech, their conscious thought, and just some of the rights of all groups. Like I said, and I emphasized all, it's going to, if you use community pluralism, it's going to protect the fundamental rights of all people, not just certain people. But if you use CSR, it's going to hinder that and only do certain people. For me, the way I looked at it is CSR stands for certain social responsibility, and not corporate social responsibility, because by implementing it and making mandatory, which the Australians are trying to do, that is ultimately making it certain. Only certain beliefs are allowed. Only certain things are allowed. So I believe that curbing it, like it said in the title, would be the best idea in this situation. And then going on to the video, which I really enjoyed, because Muhammad Onis was interviewed and he really keyed in on a lot of aspects. And basically he talked about a crisis that's going on, and about a Nobel Peace Prize winner who's changing and conforming all of her ideas that ultimately had won her the Nobel Peace Prize in the beginning. And he really talks about how she's ruining the or how in a lot of people's eyes she's ruining what she had started with. And it really inspired me, then the fact that he stayed true to himself and he's really not let anything really change him, the power that he has over the world, and ultimately the money that he could potentially be gaining for profit, but he's not, because of his social business idea, which we're going to go into. So it dives into his books, and it basically is talking about making the 3 zeros, and it's number one. She jokes that it's number one on utopian ideology, and I thought that was really funny because he was like, oh, I made it. But anyways, besides that, he talks about social businesses and why social businesses should be a key part of the world. And I found it really intriguing because it really challenges banks in the aspect that they are, they're not out to help everyone. And when I thought of this, I was like, well, that doesn't really, like, banks are meant to help people. They give people loans, but in the end, they don't give everyone loans. They give the people that have collateral, which doesn't make sense. And he keys in on that when you're just giving people that have money, are you really helping, or are you just aiding a problem? So I really saw that and made me really jump into the video. And he talks about how he's seeing issues in the poor, and basically if you're poor, you have poor health. That's inevitable. So he started this business, and it was a social business. He started selling vegetable seeds and didn't catch on when they started selling them for 1 cent, and it became very popular, even the largest seed company in Bangladesh. And so he sold them. It was big. Even like rich people were buying it because it was cheaper and all kinds of stuff. But in the end, his result was he saw no more night blindness. It disappeared. So by solving a problem and making those poor people have a little more, not necessarily wealth, but wealth in another aspect, wealth in the food aspect, he ultimately saw less blindness, or it disappeared. Then he also brought in sanitation, which not everyone had. Here in the United States, we have a lot of accesses to things, but in Bangladesh, they didn't have the access to sanitation, so they brought that in. Well, they were giving it to the poor, and then ultimately that resulted in the rich telling their husbands, look, they have it, why can't we? So it just expanded and expanded. So that was a great aspect. But what I really liked is he he had a problem at the beginning because he would try to solve in a business way, and the common feature that he found in that he would try to solve it in a business way, but then his common feature was he was trying to solve a problem but not make money. His ultimate goal is to basically create a company, make a profit, and it just keeps circulating within the company. And this is just gonna expand it and keep it permanent and not dependent on anyone. And that's when he goes into why charities have that little bit of a problem, in the sense that they are dependent on donations and not necessarily being self-sufficient. So social businesses should be self-sufficient, but not necessarily try to key in on making profit. And so I thought that was really cool, in the fact that you're making a profit, but you're keeping it in the company, and that's where you're seeing that social business aspect come into key. And it's basically just realizing that there's a problem, figuring out a way to solve it, and then just keeping that money in it, not trying to make a big profit and become greedy. But then he talks about how he made this microcredit, which to me is mind-blowing, because he saw a 99.5/99.6 repayment rate. People all over the world were like, you're crazy, you're not going to get paid back, they don't have collateral, what are they going to give you? Well, he found that poverty is not created by the poor. Poverty is created by the system. The system is already stacked against the poor. It's stacked into not helping them, into keeping them poor. Well, when you give to them, they're going to make something of themselves, not necessarily for themselves, but of themselves, because they want their community to do better overall, especially women. So he would give microloans to them, and he would see them build something for the community as a whole that would end up, like I said, creating profit and being self-sufficient. So he talked about that, and then he goes on to say that basically there's two types of business, one to make money and one to solve problems. So the social business is obviously the one to solve problems, and then you have your businesses, your corporate ones, to make money. So it's crazy, he pointed out, that about 8 people have half the wealth in the world, and that was just crazy to me. And he's talking about how we need to even this out and make it more sustainable for everyone in the world to be able to live a sufficient life. And so I thought that was really cool. But he basically talks about his microloans a lot. For me, the big thing is that I took away from this is that anybody can start a social business. They just have to start piece by piece. It's like a puzzle. You take out a puzzle box. This is how I put it in my head. If you take out a puzzle, it's not going to come out all together. If you try to rush it, it's going to just get more frustrating and more irritating, and you're going to potentially give up. But if you start piece by piece, for me, I start with the edges first. Start with the edges and then work on the insides. But if you do that, if you start piece by piece, it's easier to manage and it's easier to see in the end. So I really keyed in on that aspect of it. There was a lot more he talked about in the video, the environment, women in general, but for me, I'm gonna end my video on talking about this, talking about how you need to key in and really focus on that piece by piece. But the piece by piece aspect is you need to take a step back and see the problem and then fix it. And then eventually, as you're fixing it, it'll continue to grow and grow and grow. It's like he used unemployment for an example, that if you make 3 jobs for 3 unemployed people, that it's eventually going to keep growing and growing and growing. So yeah, he couldn't give microloans to everyone at once, but he could give to a few, and then it would grow, and then he could give to more, and then it would grow. So this made me realize that my vision is possible if I take a step back and don't try to do everything at once, which I find is a problem amongst many people, especially myself. I want to jump in, I want to see instant gratification, as they would say, but I need to step back and be patient and realize that it is possible if I set it in motion and take it a day at a time. So I spoke about my vision in my previous videos, how I want to start basically not a foundation, but facilities around. I want to start in my town now, but I want to start facilities all over the United States for people that didn't necessarily have financial like teaching, and that's why they're having financial issues, that they just simply don't know how to do it. And then while they're doing that, their children can come and we'll teach them skills, but in a fun way, revolved around either sports, reading, painting, art, things that they find interest in. One of my big ideas is they like basketball. Hey, start a basketball team, but you have to buy uniforms, you have to create them, you have to budget, and you have to pay for a coach, and we'll give them that money, but they have to learn how to budget it and really set everything into motion. So if I start in my little town, it could potentially grow and grow and grow. So basically, social business is finding that problem, that is a problem in my small community. A lot of immigrants don't have the ability to get that teaching, so and then that's a solution I think could potentially help. But if I start small and it grows, it would be amazing. But that's just an example of just something I could potentially do to create a social business. And without Muhammad Yunus really putting that in my head, I would sit here and want to do everything at once and potentially not even get it done, because I'd be overwhelmed, irritated, and agitated and not feel like doing it. So overall, his microloans, everything he's done, it is amazing. But at the end of the day, he's just a regular person who saw a problem, fixed it piece by piece, and now he's just sharing his knowledge to the world. And so I found that video very intriguing, and I explained the paper and what it really brought into perspective for me as a business major. And so I think we should curb corporate social responsibility, which in the end I think is certain responsibility, because it's focusing on certain aspects and certain social things and really politics. So I think we need to curb it. And then I believe social business is capable. Anyone is capable to start a social business if they really put their mind to it and start piece by piece. Bye.